Hi everyone. If you're here for some spine-chilling tales to help you drift off to sleep, you're in the right place. Get cozy, settle in, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. This helps us release our videos at just the right time for you. Now, let's dive into the darkness together. Story 1. The Raincoat Man. The rain wasn't water. It was a living, breathing entity, hissing as it devoured the gravel road beneath Caitlin's Jeep. She'd driven 6 hours into the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, chasing a cryptic note scribbled on a napkin. Cedar Hollow, where the rain remembers, her photography project. Vanishing America thrived on places like this, down scrubbed from maps, but etched into the nightmares of those who dared whisper their names. The windshield wipers groaned, struggling against the storm's fury. Caitlin squinted at the GPS, now a lifeless black screen. The napkin's directions, smudged with what she hoped was coffee, led her deeper into the woods. Pine branches scraped the Jeep's sides like skeletal fingers, their shadows dancing in the headlights. A weathered sign emerged from the gloom. Population 47 maybe. The maybe was carved jaggedly, the wood beneath still raw and weeping sap. Cedar Hollow was a corpse frozen mid-decay. Storefronts leaned precariously, their windows boarded with planks that bled rust. A church stood sentinel at the town's edge, its steeple a broken spine jutting into the storm. Caitlin parked outside the only building emitting a faint glow, a shop named Wilkins Oddities. The missing eye in the flickering neon sign transformed it into W. Kins, a riddle begging to be solved. The door creaked open, releasing a gust of air thick with dust and decay. Behind the counter, a woman materialized from the shadows. Mrs. Wilkins was a spectre draped in moth-eaten silk, her eyes void swallowing the scant light. "You're late," she rasped, her voice like parchment tearing. Caitlin forced a smile, her fingers tightening around her camera strap. "I didn't realize we had an appointment." The old woman slid a damp cardboard box across the counter. It left a trail in the dust, the corners stained a suspicious burgundy. "From the Hadley house. Don't open it after dark." "Or what? Ghost'll throw a party." Mrs. Wilkins' laugh crackled like static. "When the sky bleeds red, he walks. The Raincoat Man. No face, no mercy. Just hollow." A thunderclap shook the room. Jars rattled on shelf, specimens floating in murky liquid. Things with too many eyes, too many teeth. Caitlin blinked, and the old woman vanished. The cabin crouched a mile outside town, cloaked by pines that whispered secrets in the wind. Caitlin dragged the box inside, her boots sinking into floorboards that moaned under her weight. The air reeked of damp earth and something sweetly rotten, like flowers left to rot in a sealed coffin. She spilled the photos onto a cracked leather couch, their edges curling like dead leaves. Black and white faces stared back, miners with soot-streaked cheeks, families posing stiffly, children with eyes too old for their faces. One photo froze her blood. A logging crew, 1947. Men stood with axes slung over shoulders, their smiles sharp as the blades they held. At the frame's edge, nearly lost to shadow, stood a figure in a raincoat, so crimson it seemed to bleed through the monochrome. His face was a blur, as if the camera had shuddered in fear. "Vintage Photoshop," Caitlin muttered, but her hands betrayed her, trembling as she lifted the photo. The coat's fabric shimmered unnaturally, too sleek, too synthetic for the 1940s, and the red. She squinted. Was it darker now, as if soaked in fresh ink? A knock rattled the window. Caitlin snatched her flashlight. The beam slicing through the gloom, rain streaked the glass like serpentine tears. Another knock tap tap echoed from the back door. Who's there? Silence. Then, a wet gurgle. The sound of a throat drowning in thick, black mud. She gripped her camera, the metal cold against her palm. The porch light buzzed weakly, its glow barely reaching the tree line. Through the peephole, the woods thrashed, in the storm's grip. But there, motionless against the chaos, stood a figure. Red raincoat, no face. Just an abyss where eyes and mouth should have been. Her camera flashed, freezing the moment in a burst of light. The Polaroid slid out, developing. Slowly. The coat wasn't red, it was black. Glistening like oil under a poison moon. The thing tilted its head. A sound oozed from it, not a voice, but 1,000 whispers crushed into one. You're not alone. Caitlin slammed the door, her heart a wild thing trapped in her ribs. When she dared look again, the figure was gone, but carved into the porch railing, glowing faintly as dying embers, were 3 symbols: a skull, an umbrella, an hourglass. Sleep was a myth. The rain mutated with the night, first drumming the roof like frantic fists, then becoming fingernails scraping glass. At 3:03 a.m., her laptop chimed. An email from Mrs. Wilkins. Subject: He knows you're here. It was a scanned newspaper clipping. November 3, 1983. Family vanishes in blood rain event. The Hadley family, James, Martha, twins Eli and Emma, disappeared during a storm locals call the skies sorrow. Neighbors reported a red shadow circling their home and a stench of rotten flowers. Another attachment: a photo of the Hadley house. In its shuttered attic window stood the raincoat man, his coat dripping black, his faceless gaze fixed on the lens. Caitlin's breath fogged the screen. The room temperature plummeted. The space heater sputtered and died, plunging her into silence. And in that silence, she heard it drip, drip, drip. Not rain, on the window. Drawing condensation, already freezing at the edges. Were the symbols again. Below them, a single word gleamed. Soon. Caitlin's hands shook as she stared at the symbols carved into her cabin's window. The rain had stopped, but the air still hummed with the storm's aftermath. The Polaroid she'd taken of the raincoat man lay on the table. The black coat, now glistening with ink under the dim light. She couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was closer in the photo than it had been in real life, its void-like face inches from the lens. The email from Mrs. Wilkins flashed in her mind. He knows you're here. She grabbed her camera and a flashlight, her boots crunching over broken glass as she stepped outside. The forest loomed ahead, the trees bent into unnatural arches, their branches clawing at the sky. The map from the antique shop led her to a path she hadn't noticed before, overgrown with thorny vines that snagged her jacket like skeletal fingers. At the end of the path stood the Hadley house. Its windows were shattered, the frame splintered into jagged teeth. The front door hung open, creaking in the wind. Inside, the air reeked of mildew and something metallic, blood, maybe. Caitlin's flashlight beam danced over peeling wallpaper, revealing words scratched into the plaster. He comes when the sky bleeds. A staircase groaned under her weight. At the top, a child's bedroom lay frozen in time. Twin beds with faded quilts, dolls with missing eyes, and a small desk cluttered with crayon drawings. One drawing stood out, a family standing under a red rainstorm, a tall figure in a black coat looming behind them. At the bottom, scrawled in shaky letters, "He lives in the walls." Caitlin's breath hitched. She pressed a hand to the nearest wall. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. Thud, thud, thud. A cold draft swept through the room. The closet door across from her inched open. Inside, a row of tiny red raincoats hung neatly, their sleeves dripping with black liquid. The floor beneath them was stained with the same substance, pooling around a single Polaroid. The photo showed the Hadley twins Eli and Emma grinning in front of their treehouse. Behind them, blurred but unmistakable, stood the raincoat man. His coat wasn't red dot, it was black, melting into the shadows like smoke. A floorboard creaked behind her. Caitlin spun, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The room was empty, but the closet door now stood wide open. The raincoats were gone. Outside, the storm had returned with a vengeance. Rain lashed her face as she ran toward the treehouse. The photo clutched in her hand. The structure leaned precariously, its wood rotted and slick with moss. She climbed the ladder, each rung groaning under her weight. Inside, dolls hung from the ceiling by their necks, their glass eyes reflecting the flash of lightning. A tiny tea set sat on a table, one cup filled with murky water, the other with a dark, viscous fluid. Caitlin's flashlight trembled as it landed on a doll in the corner, a perfect replica of Emma Hadley, down to the freckles on her cheeks. The doll's dress was a miniature red raincoat. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from below. Caitlin peered through a gap in the floorboards. The raincoat man stood motionless at the base of the tree house, his faceless gaze fixed upward. In his hand, a doll with her face, its eyes scratched out. She stumbled back, her elbow knocking over the tea set. The dark fluid spilled across the floor, spreading like veins. The symbols on her arm burned suddenly, searing her skin. Back at the cabin, Caitlin barred the doors. The symbols pulsed in time with her racing heart. She tore off her jacket and froze. The wallpaper bulged, breathing. Thud, thud, thud. A wet crack split the air. The wall above her bed ruptured, disgorging a flood of black water. Polaroids surged out with its snapshots of missing hikers, campers, the Hadleys. Their faces were scratched out, replaced by the raincoat man's void. A hand shot from the water skeletal, dripping with rot. Caitlin screamed as the thing emerged, a corpse in a tattered red coat, its face a writhing mass of shadows. "You're next," it gurgled, voices overlapping. Eli's laugh, Emma's scream, Mrs. Wilkins' rasp. Kaitl fled into the storm, the thing's footsteps slapping behind her. The road had vanished, swallowed by mud. Her jeep sat stranded, tires sunk to the axles. The raincoat man materialized ahead, his coat billowing like a living thing. "You can't outrun the storm," it whispered. Her camera flashed. The Polaroid revealed the truth. The raincoat man wasn't chasing her, he was herding her toward the mine. 3 The mine entrance yawned like a throat, its darkness swallowing Caitlin's flashlight beam. The symbols on her arm burned hotter with each step, the hourglass now half empty. Behind her, the raincoat man's whispers slithered through the storm. "You belong here." With them, the tunnel walls glistened with a substance thicker than water. She touched it, sticky, cold, reeking of copper. Her fingers came away red. Blood rain. The farther she walked, the louder the walls hummed, vibrating with a low, guttural chant. A chamber opened ahead, lit by an unnatural crimson glow. Dozens of red raincoats hung from the ceiling, swaying gently despite the stagnant air. Beneath them, a stone altar bore carvings of the same symbols. Polaroids littered the floor, decades of missing faces, each photo defaced with black ink. where the raincoat man stood watching. A child's giggle echoed. Caitlin turned. Eli and Emma Hadley sat cross-legged in the corner, their skin translucent, eyes hollow. "We tried to run too," Eli said, his voice a brittle echo. "But the storm always wins." Emma pointed to the altar. "That's where he feeds." The ground trembled. The raincoats thrashed as if filled with invisible bodies. Caitlin's camera slipped from her hands, flashing as it hit the ground. The Polaroid developed instantly, the raincoat man standing behind her, his coat unraveling into tendrils that pierced the walls. The words "your turn" scrawled in blood. At her feet, she ran, the mine collapsing in her wake. The twins' laughter followed, twisting into the raincoat man's guttural growl. Outside, the storm had reached its crescendo. The sky wasn't just bleeding, it was screaming. Red lightning fractured the clouds, each strike etching the symbols into the earth. Her Jeep was gone, swallowed by the mud. Only the antique shop remained, its neon sign now reading, "Welcome home." Mrs. Wilkins stood inside, her obsidian eyes reflecting the chaos. "You shouldn't have opened the box," she hissed, gesturing to the now rotted cardboard on the counter. The photos inside had fused into a single image. Caitlin, standing beside the altar, the raincoat man's hand on her shoulder. "Why me?" Caitlin demanded. The old woman smiled, her teeth blackened and sharp. "The storm picks its favorites. You've been marked since the first flash." A crash, the shop's windows shattered. The raincoat man filled the doorway, his void face stretching into something resembling a grin. Caitlin grabbed a jar from the shelf, a preserved heart floating in yellow liquid, and hurled it. The thing staggered, its coat sizzling where the liquid touched. She dove past it. Into the storm. The church loomed ahead, its broken cross now glowing with the same crimson light as the mine. Inside, the pews were filled with red raincoats, their hoods turned toward the pulpit. On the altar lay a familiar doll, the one with her face. The raincoat man appeared beside her, his voice a chorus of the damned. "Join us, or feed us." Her camera flashed one last time. The Polaroid showed her reflection in the church window, a red raincoat draped over her shoulders, her face dissolving into static. The storm stopped. Sunlight pierced the clouds, illuminating Cedar Hollow as it once was, vibrant, alive, hungry. The townsfolk waved from their porches, their smiles to wide, eyes to dark. Mrs. Wilkins stood at the diner counter, sliding a milkshake toward a man in a red coat. And Caitlin? She sat in the antique shop's back room, her hands steady as she labeled a new box. "Vanishing America, Final Chapter." Outside, the rain began again. The red raincoat clung to Caitlin's skin, a living thing, its fabric whispering secrets in a language that slithered into her mind. Cedar Hollow's street stretched before her, no longer a graveyard of decay, but a twisted mockery of life painted in hues of crimson under a sky choked with black clouds. The townsfolk waved from their porches, their smiles to wide, eyes hollow pits glowing faintly red. Mrs. Wilkins stood at the diner's entrance, her skeletal fingers wrapped around a coffee mug filled with thick, bubbling liquid. "You're late," she croaked, her voice echoing from every shadow. "The storm won't wait." Caitlin's hands trembled as she stared at the symbols carved into her palms, now pulsing like a second heartbeat. "I didn't choose this." The old woman's laugh was the sound of breaking bones. "The storm doesn't care about choices. Feed it, or it feeds on you." A car rolled into town, tires splashing through puddles of rainwater the color of dried blood. A family of 4 parents and 2 children stepped out, their laughter grating against the silence. The father, a man with a camera around his neck, grinned nervously. "Saw your town online. Perfect for our documentary, Mrs. Wilkins nudged Caitlin. "Show them the real Cedar Hollow. The mine entrance gate." Its darkness swallowing the family's chatter, Caitlin led them down the narrow tunnel, her flashlight beam trembling over walls, slick with a substance that glistened like fresh ink. The youngest child, a girl clutching a stuffed bear, tugged her sleeve. "Is this where the ghosts live?" Caitlin's throat tightened, something like that. The walls began to hum, a low, guttural vibration that made the family clutch their ears. The father's camera flashed, capturing nothing but shadows. "Weird. The lens keeps fogging up." "Because it's not fog," Caitlin thought. The air was thick with the storm's breath, a mix of ozone and rotting flesh. She stopped at the altar chamber, where red raincoats hung like skinned corpses. The symbols on the stone slab glowed, casting bloody light over Polaroids of missing faces. The mother gasped, "Are those real?" Before Caitlin could answer, the raincoat man materialized behind the family, his void face stretching into a grin only she could see. Tendrils of darkness erupted from his coat, wrapping around the children's ankles. "What's happening?" the father screamed, his camera clattering to the ground. Caitlin's Polaroid slipped from her pocket, developing mid-air. The family standing at the altar, their eyes scratched out, the words "the storm is hungry" written in their blood. The mine collapsed as Caitlin fled, the family's screams swallowed by the earth. Outside, the sky had turned the color of a fresh bruise. The church bell tolled, shaking the ground. Townsfolk emerged from their homes, red raincoats flapping in the windless air. Their faces flickered, rotting flesh one moment, human the next. Mrs. Wilkins stood at the pulpit, her voice a chorus of the damned. "Another offering, another year of peace," the crowd chanted, their words harmonizing with the storm's roar. Caitlin's camera flashed, revealing their true forms. Eyeless children, creatures with too many limbs, shadows wearing human skin. The raincoat man appeared beside her, his coat brushing her arm. "Your hours now," the voices hissed. "Or join them underground." She glanced at the mine, its entrance now sealed. Somewhere beneath the rubble, the real Caitlin Myers still screamed. The tourist's car sat abandoned at the town's edge. Caitlin placed a box on the passenger seat, a doll with the family's stitched together faces, a vial of red rain, and a Polaroid of their final moments. The engine roared to life on its own, steering toward the highway. Back at the antique shop, she flipped the sign to open. The shelves had restocked themselves, jars of preserved eyes, dolls with moving lips, and a new box labeled "Vanishing America. Final Chapter." The first customer arrived at dusk, a young woman with a blog about haunted towns. "I've heard so much about Cedar Hollow. Can you show me around?" Caitlin smiled, her reflection in the window flickering into a red-coated silhouette. "Let's start with the mine." Outside, thunder rumbled. Somewhere, a storm laughed. Story 2. The Forgotten Experiment. The rain fell in sheets, drumming the roof of the old farmhouse like 1,000 impatient fists. Marcus Wheeler slumped into the armchair, his moving boxes stacked haphazardly around him. The realtor had called the place rustic charm. Marcus called it a structural hazard, but the price was right, and the isolation was perfect for his research studying extremophile bacteria in remote environments. Also, he told himself. He flipped through the previous owner's photo album left on the mantel. The black and white images showed a smiling family, parents, 2 kids, A dog posing in front of the house. Normal. Except for one detail. In every photo, a blurred figure stood in the background near the barn. Its face smudged out. Marcus squinted. The blur wore what looked like a lab coat. A gurgling sound hissed through the walls. Marcus froze. The noise came again, a wet, rhythmic scraping, like something dragging itself through the pipes. He followed the sound to the basement door. Its padlock rusted shut. The key the realtor gave him snapped in the lock. Perfect, he muttered. Grabbing a crowbar, the door creaked open, releasing a breath of cold, chemical-tinged air. The stairs groaned under his weight. At the bottom, his flashlight revealed not a basement, but a laboratory frozen in time. Bile rose in Marcus's throat. The lab was straight out of a 1950s horror film. Glass cabinets lined the walls, filled with jars of organs floating in amber liquid. A stainless steel exam table stood center stage, stained brown with age or blood. Notebooks lay open on a desk, their pages filled with frantic handwriting. Subject 12 shows increased aggression post-injection. Skin transparency at 87%. Must refine serum. The storm makes them stronger. They crave the rain. A crack of thunder shook the house. The lights flickered. In the sudden darkness, Marcus's flashlight beam caught something moving in the corner, a shadow darting behind a cabinet. Hello. His voice echoed. Silence. Then dash scratch from inside the walls. Upstairs, the storm raged louder. Marcus paced the living room, the photo album still open. He stared at the blurred figure in the lab coat. The barn. He threw on his raincoat and splashed across the yard. The barn doors were chained, but one kick sent them swinging inward. The smell hit first rotten meat and formaldehyde. Rows of cages lined the walls, their bars twisted open. At the back, a glass containment cell stood intact. Inside, a child's drawing was taped to the wall, a family standing under a red storm, a tall figure in a lab coat looming behind them. Daddy says the rain makes the monsters grow. Marcus's phone buzzed a weather alert. Severe thunderstorm. Warning. Seek shelter immediately. As he turned to leave, his foot kicked something metallic. A film canister. Inside, a single slide labeled Subject 23. Back in the house, Marcus set up his portable microscope. The slide contained a blood sample. When magnified, the cells writhed like living things, pulsating under the lens. Scratch. The sound came from the basement door. Marcus approached, crowbar in hand. The door was slightly ajar. He hadn't left it open. A drop of red liquid fell onto his shoe. He looked up. The ceiling was bleeding. The red droplet splashed onto Marcus's boot, spreading like a tiny venomous flower. He staggered back, crowbar raised, as the ceiling above him cracked open like an eggshell. A viscous crimson rain poured down, drenching the floor in a pall that shimmered under his flashlight. The metallic stench burned his nostrils, not blood, but something chemical, acidic. He stumbled into the kitchen, grabbing dish towels to barricade the basement door. The scratching grew louder, now accompanied by a wet, guttural growl that vibrated through the walls. The storm outside roared in response, lightning flashing through the windows to reveal grotesque shadows dancing on the walls. Too many limbs, too many eyes. Marcus's microscope still sat on the table, the slide labeled Subject 23 glowing faintly. Against his better judgment, he peered through the lens. The cells weren't just moving, they were multiplying, splitting into jagged shapes that pulsed in time with the thunder. A drop of the red liquid hit the slide. The cells erupted, twisting into a microscopic swarm that shattered the glass. What "The hell?" Marcus whispered, wiping his eyes. A crash echoed from the barn. The storm had torn the barn doors off their hinges. Marcus fought the wind, his raincoat flapping like a wounded bird. Inside, the cages rattled violently. The child's drawing was gone. In its place, a fresh message scrawled in mud. "They wake when the sky bleeds." A low moan reverberated through the barn. Marcus turned, flashlight beam trembling. The glass containment cell was now filled with the red liquid, swirling like a mini hurricane. Inside, shapes pressed against the glass humanoid, translucent, their skin peeling like old parchment. One of them opened its mouth. No sound came out, but Marcus's mind flooded with a single word: "Run." He bolted, the barn doors slamming shut behind him. The wind carried a new sound, laughter, sharp and broken, like glass underfoot. Back in the lab, Marcus frantically rummaged through the notebooks. The previous owner's handwriting grew increasingly unhinged. Subject 17 breached containment. 8 through steel. Only the rain calms them. The serum requires lightning. The storm is the key. They call me father now. A Polaroid fell from the pages. A man in a lab coat standing beside the containment cell, his face blurred, surrounded by creatures with glowing eyes. On the back, scribbled in red, "We are all subjects here." The scratching from the basement door became pounding. Marcus jammed a chair under the knob, sweat dripping into his eyes. The red liquid seeped under the door, thickening into tendrils that crawled up the walls. A voice crackled from an old radio on the desk, static masking its tone. "Doctor, please, make it stop." The power died. Marcus's flashlight flickered as he fled upstairs. In the living room, the photo album lay open to a new page of family portraits, their faces scratched out, replaced by the blurred figure now standing front and center. Its lab coat dripped red. The ceiling groaned. Marcus looked up just as a clawed hand punched through the plaster, grabbing his collar. The creature's skin was translucent, veins pulsing with the same glowing liquid from the slide. Its jaw unhinged, releasing a shriek that mirrored the storm's fury. Marcus swung the crowbar. The creature recoiled, hissing, then melted into a puddle that seeped back into the ceiling. The house fell silent. Even the rain paused, as if holding its breath. On the kitchen table, the radio buzzed to life. Subject 23. Activated. The radio's static clung to the air like a suffocating fog. Marcus stared at the cracked device. Its dials rusted, its voice repeating the same phrase. Subject 23. Activated. The storm raged louder, rain hammering the roof like bullets. The red liquid pooling on the floor had thickened, tendrils of it now creeping up the walls in jagged patterns. Marcus's hands shook as he grabbed a lantern, its flickering light casting monstrous shadows on the peeling wallpaper. He needed answers, fast. The basement lab awaited, its door groaning as he descended. The lantern's glow revealed something new. A steel door at the back of the lab, hidden behind rotted cabinets. Its surface was etched with symbols, and a keypad crusted with dried blood. Marcus pried it open with the crowbar, the metal screaming in protest. Beyond lay a corridor lined with cells, glass walls, fogged with age, held horrors that made Marcus's stomach churn. Creatures, some humanoid with translucent skin, others twisted masses of limbs and teeth pressed against the barriers. Their eyes glowed faintly, tracking his every move. At the corridor's end, a cell labeled Subject 23 pulsed with a sickly, green light. Marcus stepped closer. The cell was empty. Then the lights died. The storm's fury seeped into the house. Thunder shook the foundation as Marcus stumbled back, lantern swinging wildly. The creatures in the cells began to shriek, their claws screeching against glass. A deafening crack echoed. One of the containment walls splintered. A creature oozed through the fissure, its gelatinous body shimmering under the lantern. It had no face, only a gaping maw lined with rows of needle-like teeth. Marcus swung the crowbar, but the creature split into two smaller entities, each lunging at him. He ran. The lab door slammed behind him, but the creatures melted through the cracks like smoke. Upstairs, the house groaned. The red liquid now covered the floors, walls, ceiling, a living web pulling itself tighter. Marcus tripped, his hand plunging into the viscous pool. It burned. Subject 23. Activated. The radio's voice blared from every room. Marcus tore through the kitchen, grabbing a flare from his emergency kit. The creatures recoiled at its hissing light, giving him a moment to think. The barn. The answers were in the barn. Wind tore at his clothes as he sprinted outside. The storm had transformed the yard into a swamp of red mud. The barn doors hung broken, the containment cell inside now shattered. The child's drawing was back on the wall, altered, the family's faces replaced with Marcus's own. In the corner, an old film projector whirred to life. Marcus hesitated, then pressed play. The grainy footage showed a man in a lab coat, the blurred figure from the photos, Dr. Elias Vaughn. His voice crackled over the film. July 12, 1958. Final entry. The serum works too well. The subjects no longer need injections. They feed on the storm, on the rain, the lightning. It changes them. The film cut to a test. A creature, subject 23, strapped to a table. Vaughn injected it with a glowing liquid. The creature convulsed, its skin dissolving into smoke. Then the camera shook, screams erupting off screen. The film ended with static. A new message scrawled itself on the barn wall in mud. He's in the rain. The house's windows exploded outward. Marcus turned to see the red liquid surging like a tidal wave, carrying the creatures with it. Their shrieks harmonized with the storm. He lit the flare and hurled it into the barn's haystack. Flames erupted, casting hellish light on the approaching horde. But the rain doused the fire. Marcus backed toward the woods, the creatures closing in. Their forms shifted, sometimes human, sometimes monstrous as the storm's lightning pulsed through them. Then, silence. The rain stopped mid-fall, droplets hanging frozen in the air. A figure emerged from the house, a man in a tattered lab coat, his face a shifting void. Dr. Vaughn, you shouldn't have come here. The figure rasped, its voice a chorus of the dead. But now, you'll make a perfect subject 23. The rain fell in thick crimson sheets, painting the world in shades of rust and rot. Marcus stood frozen, the vial of glowing serum clutched in his shaking hand. Dr. Vaughn's spectral form flickered, like a corrupted film reel, his lab coat billowing in the stormless wind. Around them, the creatures writhed, their translucent bodies pulsing with every lightning strike. You think you can stop this? Vaughn's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. The storm is their lifeblood. The rain, my masterpiece, is their voice. Marcus backed toward the barn, mud sucking at his boots. The serum burned in his grip, its label peeling to reveal handwritten text. Final formula. Reverse the storm. A creature lunged, jaws snapping. Marcus ducked, plunging the crowbar into its gelatinous chest. It screamed a sound like radio static before dissolving into the red muck. "They're yours now," Vaughan hissed. The ground trembled, the house collapsing inward as the red liquid surged like a living tsunami. The barn was the only shelter left. Marcus barricaded the doors with rusted tools, his breath fogging the air. The projector still ran, its flickering light revealing Vaughan's final experiment. Subject 23 is not a creature. It's the storm itself, my greatest achievement. The film cut to Vaughan injecting himself with the serum. Lightning struck the lab, his skin dissolved, his screams merging with the thunder as he became smoke, shadow, something else. Marcus's hands trembled. The serum wasn't a weapon, it was a catalyst. Outside, the creatures howled. The barn door splintered. Marcus uncapped the vial. The serum glowed brighter, reacting to the storm. He didn't hesitate. The liquid burned like molten lead in his veins. Lightning struck the barn, electricity arcing through his body. The world fractured into blinding white light. When his vision cleared, the storm pulsed inside him. He could feel the creature's hunger, Vaughan's rage, the red rain's whisper. "You're one of us now." Vaughan's voice slithered into his mind. "No," Marcus growled. "I'm the cure." The creatures froze as Marcus raised his hand. The rain obeyed, reversing its fall, droplets soaring back into the clouds. The creatures shrieked, dissolving into vapor as the storm unraveled. Vaughan's spectral form writhed, clawing at the sky. "You can't. This is my legacy." "Legacy of madness," Marcus spat. With a roar, he thrust his hands downward. Lightning struck Vaughan, his form exploding into ash. The red rain faded, replaced by clear water. The creatures were gone. Dawn broke over the ruins. Marcus collapsed, the serum's power spent. His skin crackled with fading energy. The symbols burned into his palms. The radio in the barn crackled to life, one last time. Subject 23. Deactivated. Marcus limped toward the road, the weight of the storm still humming in his bones. Behind him, the house groaned, its foundations crumbling into the earth. But as he reached the highway, the first drops of rain fell clean, pure. Then his hands began to glow. Story 3. The Drowning Girl. The rain whispered secrets to the lake, turning its surface into a fractured mirror. Lydia Hart gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white as she navigated the mud-slick road. The realtor's directions had led her deep into Michigan's backwoods, where pine trees crowded like silent sentinels. The cabin, her fresh start, sat at the water's edge, its roof sagging under decades of neglect. She parked, her boots sinking into the soggy earth. The realtor's parting words slithered back. "Don't swim in the lake after dark. The currents, they're tricky." But Lydia hadn't come to swim. She'd come to forget the accident, the hospital bills, the divorce, the key stuck in the rusted lock. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and mothballs. A welcome basket sat on the kitchen counter, its cellophane yellowed. Inside, a jar of homemade blackberry jam from Clara's garden, a map of hiking trails, and a Polaroid of a girl in a blue dress standing by the lake. Lydia frowned. The girl's face was blurred, her dress soaked as if she'd just climbed out of the water. Nightfall brought the storm's encore. Rain drummed the roof, and the lake growled like a living thing. Lydia curled into an armchair, wineglass in hand, staring at the Polaroid. The girl's blurry face seemed to shift under the lamplights. Drip, drip, drip. The sound came from the bathroom. Lydia followed it, her socks soaking up a puddle of icy water. The faucet wasn't leaking. The droplets fell from the ceiling, though the roof showed no cracks. She mopped the floor and returned to the living room. Drip, drip, drip. Again. This time, the puddle stretched from the bathroom to the foot of the stairs. Lydia's breath hitched. The water smelled like lakeweed and something metallic. At 3 a.m., the storm died. Lydia jolted awake to a new sound, a child's laughter, high and watery. She followed it to the back porch. Moonlight carved a path across the lake, where a girl, in a blue dress, stood ankle-deep in the water. "Hey!" Lydia shouted. "It's not safe." The girl turned. Her face was pale, her hair stringy with algae. She raised a hand, pointing to the center of the lake. Drip, drip, drip. The sound came from behind Lydia this time. She spun. The kitchen floor shimmered with water, though all the windows were closed. The Polaroid lay face up on the table. The girl's face was now clear, same pale skin, same algae hair. Clara scrawled on the back in faded ink. The next morning, Lydia found the garden, overgrown and choked with weeds. Its center held a stone marker. Clara Marie Whitaker, 2001 to 2015. She loved the lake. A doll lay at the base, its porcelain face cracked, dress stained with mud. Lydia knelt to brush it off. The doll's head turned with a click, glass eyes locking onto hers. Drip, drip, drip. She dropped the doll. The sound wasn't coming from the house anymore. It was coming from her. Water trickled from her sleeves, her hair, her paws. Panicked, she stumbled to the lake, plunging her hands in to rinse the phantom dampness. The water coiled around her wrists like cold fingers. When she pulled free, the doll sat on the shore, staring. That night, the storm returned fiercer. Lydia dreamt of Clara, the girl wading into the lake, her dress billowing. A hand reaching from the depths, skeletal and green. Bubbles rising as she sank. Lydia woke gasping. Her room flooded ankle deep. The Polaroid floated past, Clara's face now twisted in a scream. Outside, the lake roared. Lydia pressed her forehead to the window. Clara stood in the rain, her soaked dress clinging to bony limbs. She pointed to the lake, her mouth moving soundlessly. "Help, Emmy. He's in the water." The rain had turned the lake into a living, breathing monster. Lydia stood at the water's edge, Clara's warning echoing in her skull. "He's in the water." The doll sat beside her, its cracked face tilted toward the depths. She tried burning it, drowning it, even smashing it with a rock. By morning, it always reappeared dry, pristine, staring. The townsfolk knew something. She'd seen it in their eyes, at the general store, the way the cashier's hands shook when she mentioned Clara's name. How the old man by the coffee pot crossed himself and muttered, "Bad business." That lake. The library was her last hope. Dusty archives revealed a single newspaper clipping from 2015. Local girl drowns in tragic accident. Clara Whitaker, 14, vanished while swimming in Lake Merrow. Search efforts failed. Body never recovered. A photo showed Clara's parents, hollow-eyed, clutching her favorite doll. The same doll now sitting on Lydia's passenger seat. That night, the storm returned. Lydia dreamt again. Clara struggling underwater, her dress tangled in weeds. A shadow circled her long serpentine, with glowing green eyes. It dragged her deeper, her screams bubbling into silence. Lydia woke choking, her lungs burning. Water poured on her pillow, reeking of algae and rot. The doll perched on her knitstand, its glass eyes reflecting the moonlit lake. She threw it out the window. Drip, drip, drip. The sound came from the closet. Inside, Clara's blue dress hung dripping. Though the window was shut, Lydia reached to touch it. The fabric lunged, wrapping around her wrist like a wet fist. Morning brought no respite. The lake had vomited its secrets onto the shore. A child's sneaker, a rusted locket, a Polaroid of Clara mid-screen. Lydia's hands shook as she flipped it over. "Help me." She followed the debris trail to a rotting dock. Underneath, something glinted, a journal sealed in a waterproof bag. Clara's loopy handwriting filled the pages. June 12th. Dad says the lake's cursed. Mom says he's superstitious, but I hear it too, the whispering at night. June 20th. Saw him today. Tall, with eyes like swamp lights. He watches me swim. July 4th. He's in my dreams now. Says I'll join him soon. Dad found the journal. He's scared. The last entry was a single sentence, ink blurred by water. He's real, and he's coming. The doll waited on Lydia's porch that evening, a dead fish clasped in its porcelain hands. Lydia's phone buzzed, a notification from her security camera. The footage showed her sleepwalking to the lake at 3 a.m., the doll leading her by the hand. She'd waded waist deep before snapping awake, screaming. She didn't remember any of it. That night, she chained herself to the bed. It didn't matter. At 3:07 a.m., the chains lay rusted and broken. The doll stood on her chest, its cracked lips moving. He's here. The lake was calm, moonlight carving a path to its heart. Lydia's feet moved without her consent, the water swallowing her ankles, knees, hips. Join us. Clara's voice bubbled from below. Join us, echoed a deeper voice, vibrating through Lydia's bones. The shadow emerged, tall, skeletal, moss dripping from its limbs. Its eyes glowed toxic green. Lydia's scream died as the water closed over her head. The water wasn't water. It was liquid silence, thick and suffocating, filling Lydia's lungs with the taste of rotting fish and forgotten secrets. She sank, Clara's doll clutched in her hand, its porcelain fingers digging into her palm. The green-eyed shadow loomed below, its elongated limbs stretching toward her like roots from a drowned tree. Join us. The voices echoed Clara's, the shadows, and hundreds more. Lydia's feet hit sludge. The lake bed was a graveyard of bones and rusted trinkets, wedding rings, pocket watches, a child's bicycle. The shadow circled her, its eyes casting a sickly glow on a stone altar covered in algae. Carved into its surface were the same symbols. From Clara's journal, the doll jerked in her grip, pointing to a tunnel carved into the lake bed. Lydia's body moved against her will, dragged by an invisible current. The tunnel led to a cavern, air pockets trapped in its ceiling like glass. Coffins. Dozens of figures floated in the water, women, children, men, their skin bleached white, eyes milky and unblinking. Clara hovered at the center, her blue dress fused to her body like a second skin. He's been here for centuries. Clara's voice bubbled into Lydia's mind. The lake feeds him. We feed him. The shadow materialized, its form shifting. One moment, a skeletal giant. The next, a swirling mass of weeds and eels. It reached for Lydia, its touch burning cold. You're special. It hissed, You see me? The doll laughed, its head rotating 180 degrees. Lydia woke on the shore, vomiting lake water. Dawn bled through the clouds, but the rain continued a steady, accusing drizzle. Her reflection in a puddle made her scream. Her eyes glowed faintly green. The cabin was a war zone. Walls wept black mold. The floors carpeted in dead fish. Clara's journal lay open. New entries scrawled in Lydia's handwriting. He showed me the truth. The town lied. They gave Clara to him. A sacrifice to keep the storms calm. The doll isn't Clara. It's him in disguise. A knock rattled the door. The sheriff stood outside, hat in hand, his face ashen. We need to talk about Clara, he said. The town church basement reeked of incense and guilt. Newspaper clippings papered the walls. Decades of drownings, all on the same date, July 4th. The sheriff lit a cigarette, hands trembling. My grandfather was mayor in 1932. First sacrifice, a drifter. The storms stopped for 10 years. Then they came back, hungrier. He pointed to Clara's photo. Her daddy refused to cooperate, so the lake took her anyway. Lydia's skin prickled. Why me? You're the first outsider since Clara. We thought maybe he'd prefer you. The doll sat between them, grinning. That night, the storm crescendoed. Lydia stood on the rotting dock, the sheriff's shotgun heavy in her hands. The townsfolk gathered in silence, their eyes downcast. A child's voice sang from the lake, ding, dong, the sacrifice is dead. Let the storm eat us all instead. The shadow rose, taller than the pines, its roar shaking the earth. Lydia fired. The doll exploded in her grip, porcelain shards slicing her palms. The shadow screamed. The lake churned, vomiting bones, dolls, and the rotting remnants of decades of lies. Clara surfaced, her form flickering. The altar, destroy it. Lydia dove, the shadow's claws ripping her back. The altar pulsed, symbols burning like neon. She smashed it with the shotgun butt. Cracks spider webbed across the stone. Green light erupting. The shadow dissolved, howling. You'll regret this, it gurgled. Lydia breached the surface, gasping. The townsfolk were gone. The lake, still, but, in the mud, a new doll sat, a miniature Lydia, eyes glowing green. The doll sat on the lakeshore, its tiny dress mimicking Lydia's torn clothes, its porcelain skin glistening with lake water. Its eyes glowed green, her green pulsing in time, with the heartbeat thrumming beneath Lydia's skin. The rain had stopped, but the air still hummed with the storm's memory. The sheriff was gone. The town was empty, but Lydia wasn't alone. Join us. The voice came from the lake, from the doll, from her own bones. Lydia walked toward the water, her bare feet leaving trails of black algae in the sand. The doll followed, its steps clicking like a broken clock. Beneath the surface, green light pulsed like a dying star. The shattered altar lay in pieces, but the symbols still burned in Lydia's mind. She waded in, the water warm now, welcoming. Join us. The shadow emerged not as a monster, but as a reflection. Lydia's reflection. It smiled, algae dripping from its hair. You're not real, Lydia whispered. I'm what you'll become. It hissed, the lake's new guardian, the storm's new voice. The doll floated between them, its head rotating slowly. Lydia's hands plunged into the sludge. Her fingers closed around a rusted chain. Clara's locket, the one from the shore. Inside, a photo of Clara and her father, his face scribbled out with black ink. On the back, a single word. Liar's shadow laughed, its form rippling. He promised to save her. He lied. They all lie. Lydia's vision fractured. Memories not her own flooded in. Clara's father, weeping as the townsfolk held him back. The sheriff's grandfather, tossing a doll into the lake, a scapegoat for the storm. Decades of drownings, each victim replaced by a doll, each doll feeding. The shadow's hunger. The chain snapped. The locket sank. The storm returned with a vengeance. Lightning split the sky, igniting the abandoned church. The lake churned, vomiting bones and dolls onto the shore. The townsfolk's lies rotted in the open air. Lydia stood waist deep, his shadow coiled around her. "I'm not your sacrifice," she growled. "No," it whispered. "You're my successor." The doll climbed onto her shoulder, its tiny hand fusing with her skin. The green pulse spread, veins of light mapping her body. Clara materialized, her form flickering. "Break the cycle. Drown him." Lydia dove. The shadow followed, its screams bubbling into silence. The cavern awaited, its walls lined with dolls, each a life stolen, each a storm silenced. The altar's remnants glowed, the symbols reforming. Lydia slammed Clara's locket into the stone. The dolls shuddered, their glass eyes shattering. The shadow howled, clawing at her as its form unraveled. "You'll drown with me." "No," Lydia said. "I'll drown you." She inhaled the lake rot and rust and rain and exhaled a scream. The water obeyed, crushing the shadow into nothing. Lydia woke on the shore. Dawn bled gold through the clouds. The dolls were gone. The lake was still, but her reflection. Her eyes still glowed. The doll sat in her lap, its face now hers. It smiled too wide. "You're mine now," it whispered. "And the storm is hungry." Story 4: The radio storm. The storm swallowed the highway, reducing the world to a writhing mass of rain and shadow. Ethan Cole white-knuckled the steering wheel of his battered van, its windshield wipers flailing like desperate hands. The weather app had called this a routine thunderstorm, but the air crackled with something darker, a static charge that made his fillings ache. His YouTube audience would eat this up. Storm Chaser Chronicles thrived on the weird. And tonight, Pennsylvania's backwoods promised electromagnetic anomalies, rogue lightning, and whispers of a radio ghost haunting Black Pine Forest. He squinted at the GPS. The signal had died an hour ago, leaving him reliant on crumpled gas. Station directions: turn left at the rotting barn, the clerk had said. If you hit the old ranger station, you've gone too far. Too far was exactly where Ethan wanted to be. The van lurched as tires fought the mud. Through the downpour, a skeletal structure emerged. The Black Pine Outpost, its sign dangling by a single chain. Ethan parked beneath its sagging awning, killing the engine. The storm's voice filled the silence, a chorus of howling wind and creaking wood. Inside, dust choked the air. The outpost was a time capsule, yellowed maps pinned to corkboards, a rusted coffee pot fossilized on a stove, and a vintage radio dominating a desk. Ethan brushed cobwebs from its call letters. WZRT 98.7, the voice of the pines. Jackpot, he muttered, setting up his livestream gear. The camera framed the radio, its dials crusted with rust. Outside, lightning split the sky, and the radio crackled to life. This is Captain James Weiler of the SS Liberty. Mayday, Mayday. We're taking on water. Ethan froze. The SS Liberty had sunk in Lake Erie in 1953. Coordinates 40.812 and 77.8675. God help us, it's in the walls. His phone buzzed. A notification from his GPS app. Live coordinates 40.8128 and 77.8675. His exact location. The radio screeched. Dials spinning wildly. A child's giggle cut through the static. Ethan, Ethan. Turn it up. He stumbled back, knocking over a tripod. The live stream chat exploded. User 456, FAKE. Storm Junkie Tattoo. Bro, that voice. Ghost Hunter me. The SS Liberty sank with 34 crew. Captain Weiler's body was never found. Ethan's hands shook. He dialed his brother, Ryan. 2 rings. Then, this is Captain James Weiler. Do not listen to the radio and phone screamed in unison. Ethan hurled the radio against the wall. It landed unscathed. Volume spiking. Found your brother. Ethan. He's with us. Now, a Polaroid slid from the radio's cracked casing. Ethan's breath hitched. The photo showed a drowned sailor, his face a waterlogged blur. On the back, scrawled in red, your tut storm's rage escalated. Rain lashed the outposts, roof like gunfire. Ethan's camera captured it all, the names scrolling on the radio's display: M. Thompson, J. Larson, R. Cole, the shadow flitting past windows, the whispers seeping through floorboards. User 456, staged, Storm Junkie Tattoo. Dude, the shadow. Behind you. Ethan spun. Nothing but peeling wallpaper. Then the lights died. His flashlight beam trembled over the desk. The radio's display now read, E. Cole. A cold breath grazed his neck. Stay with us, Ethan. He fled to the van, mud sucking at his boots. The engine roared to life, headlights slicing through the storm. The highway was gone, swallowed by flooding. A detour sign pointed deeper into the pines. Black Pine Campground to Molest van, fishtailed, hydroplaning into a ditch. Ethan cursed, grabbing his gear. The radio's voice followed him, booming from the trees. Don't run. We've been waiting. The campground was a graveyard of rotting cabins. Ethan ducked into the least collapsed one, barricading the door with a moldy mattress. His phone buzzed a voicemail from Ryan. Sent 3 hours ago. Ev, call me. Back. This storm. Something's wrong. I keep hearing. Static swallowed the rest. Dawn brought no relief. The rain had stopped, but the forest dripped with malice. Ethan's boots sank into moss as he followed a trail of snapped branches. The trees thinned, revealing a clearing and a radio tower. Its base overgrown with thorny vines dotted its foot lay a rusted metal box. Inside, a logbook. June 12, 1953. WZRT hijacked by distress signal. Crew vanished. Tower sealed. July 4, 1987. Reopened. Signals returned. Interns found. Altered. October 31, 2023. Do not trust the voices. The last entry was his brother's. Handwriting. Ethan. If you're reading this, I'm already part of the broadcast. Destroy the tower. Don't let it. The page tore away. Ethan's camera live streamed his ascent up the tower, rusted rungs biting his palms. At the top, the storm's eye loomed, a swirling void of green-black clouds. He aimed his wrench at the transmitter. The radio in his backpack crackled. "Don't you want to see Ryan again?" A figure materialized below, translucent and flickering Ryan. His face stretched into a static grin. "Join the broadcast. Will be legends." Ethan swung the wrench. The tower erupted in sparks. The fall knocked the breath from his lungs. Ethan crawled from the wreckage, the forest screaming around him. The radio in his bag hissed. "You can't silence the storm." His phone buzzed a new voicemail. Ryan's voice, warped and watery. "Ethan, it's in the walls now." In the distance, the outpost's lights flickered. The radio's display glowed through the broken window. "Welcome home." The outpost's lights pulsed like a heartbeat. Green-black shadows stretching across the walls. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, his soaked clothes dripping onto warped floorboards. The radio's display blared "Welcome home," its glow etching the words into his retinas. Behind him, the storm growled, rain slashing the trees like shrapnel. His brother's voicemail looped in his mind. "It's in the walls now." Ethan's camera was still rolling. The live stream chat scrolled frantically. "Ghost hunter me. That radio is haunted. Get out. Storm Junkie Tattoo. Bro." The shadow behind you moved. He spun, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The wall behind the desk bulged, peeling wallpaper revealing symbols carved into the plaster. The radio screeched, dial spinning. A new transmission clawed through the static. "Ethan Cole, you shouldn't have come back." There, in the wires, Ethan grabbed the radio, hurling it out the window. It landed in the mud, unharmed, volume swelling. "Ryan says hello." He's louder now. The van was dead. Battery drained. Ethan slumped in the driver's seat, rainwater pooling at his feet. His phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. 7175550-192. Follow the lights. Through the rain, flickering blue orbs danced above the tree line. "Willow, the wisps." Or something worse. He followed, boots sinking into boggy earth. The forest, whispered voices overlapping, layered under the static of his dying phone. 1953. They opened the door. "Don't let it out." The lights led to a shack, half buried in ivy. Inside, a ham radio setup dominated the room. Dust-coated monitors displaying waveforms spiking erratically. A corkboard hung above it, pinned with newspaper clippings. "Local man vanishes near radio tower 1987. Black Pine curse claims another family 2005. At the center, a photo of the SS Liberty crew, their faces scratched out except for Captain Weiler, whose eyes were X'd with red ink. Ethan's camera panned to a journal on the desk. The entries were frantic. June 12, 1953. WZRT picked up the Liberty's Mayday. "We thought it was a prank. Then the crew started seeing things, faces in static, voices in the rain." June 30th, 1953. "Sealed the tower. Too late. It's in the wires now. It's in US." The final entry. Ryan Cole came asking questions, told him to burn it all. Pray he listened. Ethan's phone rang. Ryan's number. "Ryan. Where? Ethan. You're too late. The storm's awake." The call dissolved into screams. Ryan's voice, warped and stretched. Ethan's phone screen cracked, bleeding sticky tendrils that coiled around his wrist. "Storm Junkie Tattoo. Dude, your arm." Ethan recoiled. The tendrils hardened into black veins, pulsing with the radio's rhythm, part of the broadcast. "Now, say hello to your audience." the radio in the shack called to life. Ethan's own face flickering on the dead miters. He fled, the forest clawing at him. The tower loomed ahead, its metal bones groaning. Ryan stood at the base, backlit by lightning. Ryan, his brother turned. His eyes were static-filled voids. "You shouldn't have come here, Eth." Ethan's camera captured it all, Ryan's mouth moving out of sync with his words, his skin flickering like a corrupted film reel. "They're gonna love you on the air, forever." Ethan swung his wrench. Ryan's form dissolved into rain. The tower's control panel sparked as Ethan smashed it. The storm screamed, wind tearing at his clothes. The radio in his backpack howled. Termination failed, signal strengthening. A figure materialized atop the tower, Captain Weiler, his uniform dripping lake water, eyes glowing green. "Join your brother, Mr. Cole. The broadcast needs fresh voices." Ethan climbed, the metal slicing his palms. At the summit, he jammed the wrench into the transmitter. Lightning struck. The blast hurled him into mud. The tower collapsed, sparking. Rain sizzled on hot metal. Ethan's camera lay nearby, still streaming. The chat raged. "User 456, fake. Ghost hunt for me." The symbols on his arm look. Ethan rolled up his sleeve. The black veins had formed the same symbols from the outpost. The radio in his backpack sputtered. "You can't kill a signal. We're always broadcasting." In the distance, the outpost's lights flickered. The radio's display glowed through the storm. Next broadcast, 12 a.m. The symbols on Ethan's arm pulsed, like a sickly heartbeat, their black veins branching toward his fingertips. The tower's wreckage smoldered behind him, but the storm wasn't done. Thunder rumbled a low, mocking laugh as rain hissed against the hot metal. His camera lay in the mud, the live stream still rolling. Comments blurred. "User 456, FAKE. But I can't look away. Ghost hunt for me." The symbols, they matched the SS Liberty's log. Ethan staggered toward the outpost. His phone buzzed a notification from a dead app. Next broadcast in 0 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds. The countdown seared his screen. Inside, the radio waited. Its display now read, "E. Cole, live at midnight." Ethan's reflection warped in its glass face, the symbols on his arm writhing under his skin. He grabbed a crowbar, swinging at the device. It shattered, then reassembled, piece by piece, like time reversing. "You're the signal now. Can't break what's already broken." The floorboards creaked. Ryan stood in the doorway, his body flickering between solid and static. "They want you to host, Eth," he said, voice layered with 100 others. "Captain Weiler's tired. Needs a replacement." Ethan lunged, crowbar passing through Ryan's chest. His brother's laugh crackled. "You'll join us, or Mom gets the next invite." A Polaroid materialized in Ethan's hand. His mother asleep. The radio by her bed tuned to 98.7. The forest blurred as Ethan ran. Rain stung his eyes, the storm guiding him to a cave mouth hidden by thorn vines. Inside, walls dripped with bioluminescent moss, casting green light on nautical charts nailed to stone. The SS Liberty's route circled black pine dot. At the cave's heart lay an ultra radio transmitter fused with barnacled ship parts. Captain Weiler's skeleton slumped against it, a headset clamped to his skull. Ethan's arm burned. The symbols glowed, synchronizing with the transmitter's hum. "Finish what we started." Wyler's voice rattled from the bones. Ethan tore the headset free. The cave quaked. His phone buzzed 0 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds. The storm stilled. Then the voices began. They poured from the trees, the rocks, the rain itself, decades of the dead, trapped in the broadcast. Ethan's camera captured it all. Shadows congealing into sailors, families, his brother. Their mouths moved in unison. Live on air. The transmitter in the cave glowed, projecting their faces onto the clouds. Ethan's arm twisted, the symbols forcing him toward the altar. Say hello. He gripped the crowbar, aiming at the transmitter. Ryan materialized, static tears streaming. Do it, Eth. End it. Lightning struck. The cave erupted. Ethan woke to silence. The storm was gone. The forest smoldered, trees reduced to charcoal skeletons. His phone lay shattered. The live stream ended, but the symbols remained. And in the distance, a new radio tower rose, sleek, metallic, humming with familiar static. The symbols on Ethan's arm pulsed like a dying star, their black veins branching into his fingertips. The new tower loomed ahead, its sleek metal frame glowing under a moon choked by storm clouds. The forest smoldered behind him, trees reduced to skeletal charcoal. His camera, miraculously intact, still streamed. Comments scrolled wildly. Ghost hunt for me. The new tower, it's a replica of the old one. Storm Junkie 22. The shadow behind him, it's moving. Ethan climbed the tower, rusted rebar slicing his palms. At the summit, a transmitter hummed. Its screen flashing, broadcasting live. E. Colian's voice crackled from the speakers. You made it, Ed. Time to light up the airwaves. Ethan swung his crowbar. Sparks flew like blood. The screen fractured, revealing glitching footage, the SS Liberty crew drowning, families dissolving into static, Ryan screaming as the storm consumed him. The symbols on Ethan's arm flared, forcing the headset onto his skull. The voices of the dead flooded his mind. Tell them our story. Tell them about the storm. The forest burned in the distance. Ethan fled to Lake Blackpine, its waters shimmering like poison mercury under the moon. The lake split, revealing the wreck of the SS Liberty, its hull barnacled and skeletal. Inside the captain's quarters, a logbook lay open. June 12, 1953. The radio picked up a transmission from the future. Ethan Cole's voice. We knew the storm would return. Captain Wyler's ghost materialized, algae dripping from his uniform. You did this, Ethan. You opened the door when you destroyed the first tower. Ethan found himself bound by coaxial cables in the ship's belly. The symbols on his arm transformed his skin into a static-filled screen, projected on the water. His mother asleep, her bedside radio tuned to 98.7. Choose, Ethan, join us, or send her instead. Ryan flickered into view, his eyes sparking. Don't give in. Destroy the source. Ethan grabbed a rusted pipe, smashing the control panel. The ship shuddered, water roaring into the breach. The storm peaked. The new tower broadcast a signal that warped the stars. Ethan swam for the surface, the symbols propelling him faster than humanly possible. Above, the storm's eye waited, a vortex of calm hiding Wyler's leering face. This is the final broadcast. Ethan, say goodbye. Ethan hurled himself into the vortex. The symbols exploded in a burst of green light. The tower collapsed, The lake swallowed the ship. The fire in the forest died. Ethan woke on the shore, unharmed but scarred. The symbols on his arm had faded to faint scars. His shattered phone showed the live stream's final frame, his face dissolving into static. Ghost hunt me. He stopped the broadcast. But look at his arm. The symbols flickered once, then dimmed. On the horizon, where the tower once stood, a small metal device glinted, a palm-sized transmitter, still humming. Story 5, The Last Patient. The rain hammered the asylum's corroded roof like 1,000 typewriter keys stuck on the same cursed letter. Dr. Evelyn Carter's leather boots sank into the mud with a sickening schluck, each step pulling harder than the last. She clutched the manila file to her chest, subject 5, its edges digging into her ribs through the soaked lab coat. The red ink had bled through the paper, forming a raw shock blotch that looked unnervingly like a screaming mouth. Gust of wind carried the stench of wet earth and something sharper, copper rot. Evelyn froze as a child's giggle slithered from a boarded-up second-story window. When she looked up, the sound dissolved into the scrape of fingernails on glass. Just a storm, she lied to herself, but her gloved hands trembled. The asylum door creaked open before she could knock, revealing Dr. Lucas Matthews backlit by flickering fluorescence. His face was a grayscale painting, all hollow cheeks and shadowed eyes. "You're digging graves here, Evelyn," he hissed, blocking the threshold. "Hers, yours, ours." She pushed past him, the hallway swallowing them whole. The air tasted like battery acid and mildew. Somewhere in the walls, water dripped in a Morse code she couldn't decipher. Matthews grabbed her elbow, his grip surgical. They tried sealing Ward D in 73. Even the rats refused to go in. "You know why?" His whisper trembled. "Because they heard them weeping through the vents." Evelyn shrugged him off, her heels clicking too loud on cracked tiles. A flicker of movement in her peripheral vision, a shadow stretching across the wall behind them, elongated and wrong. When she turned, it vanished, leaving only a dark smear like grease. "Superstitions don't belong in medicine, Lucas. This isn't medicine," he spat. "It's a confession booth for monsters." The deeper they walked, the more the building breathed. Pipes groaned like dying animals. A cold draft snaked up her spine. Despite the stagnant air, they passed a rusted sign. "Ward D. Authorized personnel only." The padlock hung open, its chain coiled on the floor like a shed snakeskin. The operating theater awaited at the end of a sloping corridor. Evelyn's breath fogged as the temperature plummeted. Her stethoscope felt like an ice brand against her neck. Through the circular window, she saw it, the silhouette, strapped to a chair, head lolling, limbs twitching at impossible angles. Matthews didn't follow her in. The door hinges screamed, cold bit through her clothes. The single overhead bulb swung, casting pendulum shadows. Subject 5's straitjacket straps were frayed, the leather chewed as if by razor teeth. A low hum filled the room, not from the ancient wiring, but from the patient's throat, a nursery rhyme tune. Subject 5, Evelyn began, injecting steel into her voice. "I'm Dr. Carr." The chair rotated slowly. Her medical bag hit the floor with a crash. The face was a funhouse mirror reflection, her mother's sunken cheeks, her own hazel eyes. But the smile, God, the smile split the face ear to ear, like a Halloween pumpkin. "Missed you, pumpkin." The thing crooned in her mother's smoke-ruined voice. A voice that shouldn't exist. Not after 20 years. Not after the closed casket. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears. The walls seemed to lean closer. The patient's head cocked, vertebrae popping like firecrackers. You left me in the well, Evelyn, but I climbed out. We all climbed out. The bulb buzzed, dimmed. In the half-light, Evelyn saw the straitjacket, straps unraveling themselves. Lucas. She yelled, backpedaling. No answer. The door was gone, where solid walls should be. Only endless blackness yawned. Subject 5 stood now, joints bending backward. The smell hit her formaldehyde and burnt hair. The thing stepped into a slash of moonlight from a barred window. No, not moonlight. The storm had choked the sky. This glow came from it. A sickly bioluminescence like deep-sea rot. They warned you. It hissed, advancing. The voice fragmented her mother's, a Charles, a chorus of strangers, when you chose to heal them. Over us. Evelyn's heel hit something wet. She glanced down. The floor poured with black liquid, not water. It climbed her shoes, viscous and hungry. The bulb exploded. In the dark, fingers colder than January closed around her wrist, a mouth pressed to her ear. Time to fix your mistake, doctor. Somewhere beyond the asylum, thunder applauded. The darkness clung to Evelyn like second skin, thick and suffocating. She stumbled backward, her boots slipping in the black liquid, pooling on the floor, a substance too viscous to be water, too cold to be oil. The thing that wore her mother's face laughed, a sound like broken glass dragged across stone. Somewhere, in the void, the asylum's pipes groaned, harmonizing with the storm's relentless roar. Evelyn's hand brushed against a wall. The concrete felt alive, pulsing faintly beneath peeling paint. She inched along it, breath shallow, until her fingers found a door frame. The handle turned with a screech, and she spilled into another corridor, this one lined with patient cells, their iron bars rusted into jagged teeth. Rain lashed against grime-caked windows, casting rippling shadows that danced like specters. A flicker of movement to her left. She spun, flashlight beam slicing through the gloom. The beam caught a message scrawled in reddish-brown streaks across the wall. She crawled out of the well. Evelyn's throat tightened. The same words her mother had whispered during her final feverish nights. The letters glistened, fresh, though the asylum had been abandoned for decades. She reached out, gloved finger brushing the substance. It clung to the latex blood, unmistakably human. A whisper cut through the drumming. Rain, not from behind her, but inside her skull. Lydia, her mother's name. A name Evelyn hadn't spoken aloud in 20 years. The flashlight flickered, shadows deepened. From the cell beside her, a wet, rhythmic sound drip, drip, drip grew, louder. Inside, moonlight, or was it that same sickly glow, revealed a handprint on the window, small, child-sized. The fingers splayed as if trying to claw through the glass. Evelyn backed away, her heel crunching on something. A patient file, yellowed and brittle. She scooped it up, pages sticking together with mold. Patient 114. Lydia Carter, admission date October 31st, 1973. Treatment, hydrotherapy. Electroshock status. Deceased. See incident report number 5D. The floor tilted. Her mother had died at home, in a bed. Not here. Never here. A cold breath grazed her neck. You didn't really think they'd let me rest, did you? Evelyn ran. The storm had breached the asylum. Water cascaded down stairwells, turning floors into shallow rivers. She waded through ankle-deep muck, the smell of sewage and rotting meat thickening the air. Behind her, splashing footsteps due fast to light, human. She didn't dare look. A door loomed ahead. Archives. She barreled through, slamming it shut. The room was a tomb of filing cabinets and dust. Rain leaked through cracks in the ceiling, forming grotesque puddles that shimmered iridescent, like gasoline. Her shaking hands found incident report number 5D. On November 2nd, patient 114, Carter, escaped confinement. Staff located her in Wellhouse 7, attempting to text illegible. Regrettably, the restraints proved inadequate. Recovery of remains unsuccessful due to the rest dissolved into water damage. Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth. The same one from her childhood nightmares. A thud above her. Footsteps creaking across the ceiling. Thud. 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 Then, a child's voice, singing. Ring around the rosy. Pockets full of posies. Evelyn froze. The song morphed, words twisting into guttural syllables, a language that scraped her eardrums. Ancient, wrong. The ceiling split. Black water exploded downward, dousing the flashlight. In the chaos, something brushed her leg, a hand, bone thin. She screamed, kicking free, and scrambled onto a desk. The water rose rapidly, now waist-high, dragging at her lab coat. Shapes moved beneath the surface, pale, skeletal. A face breached the water. Not her mother's, a child's. Its eyes were milky voids, mouth stitched shut with wire. It reached for her, stitches snapping one by one. Ashes, ashes. The voice came from all directions now, layered with other tones, men, women, all chanting those corrupted verses. The water glowed faintly, revealing symbols etched into the floorboards beneath her, repeating in a spiral pattern. Evelyn lunged for a ventilation grate, fingers bleeding as she pried it open. She hauled herself into the duct, the metal biting her palms. Below, the water boiled with shapes, dozens of hands, dozens of faces. She crawled. The duct emptied into a chapel, pews overturned, hymnals rotting in puddles. Stained glass windows depicted angels with hollowed eyes. At the altar, a figure knelt, head bowed. Lucas, Evelyn whispered. Dr. Matthews turned. His eyes were gone, sockets filled with wriggling black worms. He smiled, teeth dripping with the same oily liquid from the theater. You shouldn't have opened the well, Evelyn. Behind him, the wall crumbled, revealing a yawning pit, a well shaft, stones slick with algae. From its depths, a familiar laugh echoed upward. The storm reached a crescendo. Thunder shook the floor. Rainwater cascaded down the walls, carving paths through decades of grime to reveal hidden words. The last patient is the first. Evelyn's radio crackled to life in her pocket. A voice she didn't recognize slicing through static. They're coming up the stairs. Then, the chapel. Doors burst open. The chapel doors exploded inward, splintering into shrapnel that embedded itself in the pews. Rain roared into the room, but it wasn't water anymore. It fell in thick, black strands, hissing like static. It hit the floor. Evelyn shielded her face, the liquid searing her skin wherever it landed. Through the gaps in her fingers, she saw them. Docked figures, dozens. They stood silhouetted in the doorway, their outlines wavering like heat mirages. Some hunched, some impossibly tall, all exuding that same bioluminescent glow. The child from the archives led the pack, its mouth now fully unstitched, lips peeled back to reveal needle-like teeth. Dr. Matthews, or what was left of him, rose from the altar, vorm spilling from his eye sockets. "They've been waiting for you," he rasped, voice blending with the chorus of whispers swelling from the well shaft. "Since the first patient, since her." Evelyn's legs gave out. She collapsed against a pew, the wood crumbling to pulp under her weight. The storm's hull warped into something articulate, a voice she recognized. Her own. "Why did you let me drown, Evelyn?" The memory struck like a cattle prod. Age 6. The old well behind their farmhouse, her mother's, arms shoving her over the edge, the splash, the darkness, the things that sang to her in the stagnant water until rescuers came. But that never happened, did it? The child entity giggled, advancing. "You forgot. We made you forget." Evelyn scrambled backward, her hand plunging into a puddle. The liquid wasn't cold anymore, it burned, seeping into her pores. Her vision doubled. The walls breathed, expanding and contracting like lungs. When she blinked, the stained glass angels twisted into new forms. Mothers holding knives, doctors with scalpels for fingers. A hand grabbed her ankle. She kicked free, stumbling into the aisle. The figures converged, their glow intensifying. The radio in her pocket screeched. That same unfamiliar voice slicing through. "They're in the walls. They're in their static." Evelyn ran toward the only exit left, the well. The shaft exhaled a putrid breeze, the stones slick with algae that squirmed under her touch. A ladder descended into the void, rungs rusted to lace. Above, the chapel quaked as the horde closed in. She climbed down. The air thickened with the stench of decaying flowers. The black rain followed, dripping past her, each drop illuminating the shaft walls in brief flashes. Symbols glowed there, etched over and over, interspersed with dates. 1973, 1954, 1921. Generations of patience, generations of sacrifices. Her foot slipped. A rung snapped. She caught herself, palms bleeding, and froze. Below, water churned, not the filthy liquid from above, but clear, almost inviting. The surface reflected a distorted version of her face, older, hollow-eyed, smiling that pumpkin grin. "Join us," her reflection mouthed. A splash above. The child dropped into the shaft, spider crawling along the walls, head rotating 180 degrees. "You're the key," it hissed. The last patient opens the door. Evelyn's watch beeped, a sound absurdly normal. 3:07 a.m. The same time stamped on every incident report. She let go. The water swallowed her whole, colder than space. Pressure built in her skull. When she opened her eyes, the well wasn't a well anymore. She floated in an endless underground lake, lit by that same sickly glow. Shapes moved beneath her, humanoid, but elongated, their limbs boneless. The surface above rippled as the child's face pressed against it. "Watching. Find her." The voices commanded. "Bring her back." Evelyn kicked deeper. The water resisted, viscous as syrup. A structure emerged below, another asylum, mirroring the one above, but older. Its bricks bloated and rotten. The door hung open. Inside, rows of iron beds stretched into darkness, each occupied by a straight-jacketed figure. Their heads turned in unison as she passed. Familiar faces flickered. Matthews, her med school professor, a childhood friend who drowned at summer camp. At the room's end, a bed stood apart. Her mother lay there, straight jacket pristine, eyes milky with cataracts. "Took you long enough," she croaked. "They've been so hungry, Evelyn. All those years you spent healing people. Did you really think you were saving them? Or just fattening them up?" Evelyn's radio crackled. The voice now came from the walls. "They're here." The beds rattled. Straps snapped. 100 patients sat up, jaws unhinging, voices merging into a drone that shook the water. "We're the cure." Evelyn grabbed her mother's wrist, brittle, papery, and yanked. "We're leaving," the old woman laughed. "Oh, pumpkin. We never left." The asylum collapsed. Water crushed Evelyn's chest. She surged upward, breaking the surface back in the chapel well. The figures surrounded the shaft, reaching. She screamed, and woke in a dry bathtub. The bathtub's porcelain pressed into Evelyn's spine, cold and unyielding. Her lab coat clung to her skin, heavy with the stench of mildew and something darker, burnt hair and formaldehyde. Rain drummed against a nearby window, but the glass was intact here. The room unnervingly ordinary. A bathroom she didn't recognize. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering in time with her ragged breaths. She staggered to her feet, her reflection warped in the fogged mirror. The face staring back wasn't hers, not entirely. One eye hazel, the other milk white, a faint smile tugged at the lips, mirroring Subject 5's razor-cut grin. "Almost home," her reflection mouthed, voice muffled as if underwater. Evelyn smashed her fist into the glass. Shards rained into the sink, slicing her knuckles. The blood pooled black, thick as tar. A radio crackled somewhere down the hall. The same voice from the chapel, clearer now. "They're in the walls. They're in the water. They're in you." The asylum had shifted. Corridors snaked in impossible directions, walls oozing a viscous sap that smelled of rotting lily. Evelyn followed the radio static, her boots sticking to the floor with each step. The storm raged outside, rain bleeding through cracks as glowing symbols bloomed like fungal growths. She found the source of the broadcast in a room labeled Project Phoenix. Monitors lined the walls, their screens showing static-laced footage of patients strapped to gurneys, surgeons carving symbols into their flesh. A dusty VCR word in the corner, replaying a tape. Subject 5, final log. Neural transfer successful. Host body shows glitch. But the well's influence is spreading. Recommend immediate. The screen died. Evelyn ejected the tape. The label read, Lydia Carter termination approved, 1973. Her mother's face stared back from a photo paper clipped to the file. Strapped to a bed, eyes wide, mouth sewn shut. Thud. Something heavy moved in the ventilation shaft above. Evelyn grabbed a fire extinguisher, backing toward the door. The ceiling panels buckled, raining dust. A hand punched through skeletal, dripping black fluid and began peeling the metal apart. She ran. The asylum led her downward, stairs melting into a spiral ramp, slick with algae. The air grew colder, denser, until each breath felt like inhaling broken glass. At the bottom, a cavern stretched into darkness, its ceiling studded with bioluminescent fungi. In the center stood the well, its stones now pulsing like a heartbeat. Figures surrounded it. Not the shadowy wraiths from before, but people. Orderlies in blooded scrubs, surgeons with rusted scalpels, patients strapped to gurneys, their mouths stretched in silent screams, all frozen. Wax museum perfect. A child's laugh echoed. The stitched mouth entity sat cross-legged atop the well, swinging its legs. Took you long enough, Doctor. The audience is getting restless. It snapped. Its fingers. The statue stirred. Evelyn backed away as the hard shambled toward her, joints cracking like dry twigs. The surgeons raised their scalpels, blades glinting with the same oily substance from the chapel. Behind her, the ramp collapsed, sealing the exit. The child giggled. Don't you want to know why you're special? Why you survived the well? Memory flickered. Evelyn at 7, sleepwalking to the farmhouse well. Her father pulling her back, screaming. They're trying to finish what they started. The first scalpel grazed her shoulder. Pain erupted, white hot, as the blade dissolved into her bloodstream. Her vision doubled, tripled. She saw the cavern through 100 eyes, the orderlies, the patients, her mothers, neural transference. The child purred. Your precious hospital's crowning achievement. They split the soul to cheat death. Your mother volunteered, until she realized it wasn't her they wanted to save. Evelyn stumbled against the well. The stones burned under her palms, etching symbols into her skin. You were the first success, the child said. A soul stitched into 2 bodies. But you forgot. They made you forget. The horde seized her. They dragged her to an operating table carved from the well stone. Leather restraints snaked around her wrists, alive and hungry. Above, the fungi dimmed, plunging the cavern into near darkness. The child climbed onto her chest, its weight impossibly heavy. Time to fix the fracture. It plunged a hooked needle into her sternum. Evelyn's scream merged with the storm. The cavern dissolved into fragments. To farmhouse. Her mother sobbing at the well. I won't let them take you. A scalpel carving into a patient's skull. The rain will purify, a surgeon chanted. Herself, age 6, sinking into black water, hands pulling her deeper. You belong to us now. The vision sharpened. The well wasn't a well, it was a channel, a bridge between realities where Project Phoenix's failed experiments festered. And Evelyn was the anchor. The child leaned close, stitches popping. The last patient closes the loop. The first patient, well, its mouth unzipped to her mother's voice. You've always been both, pumpkin. Evelyn's body convulsed. Her left eye clouded, milk-white bleeding into hazel. The storm reached critical mass. Rain punched through the cavern ceiling, a deluge of black liquid that dissolved the horde on contact. The child shrieked, melting into a puddle of worms and teeth. Evelyn's restraints loosened. She rolled off the table, her limbs alien, twitching. The well's glow intensified, pulling her like a magnet. Voices overlapped hers, her mother's, 1,000 others. Jump, fly, ascend. The radio crackled in her pocket. One last time. They're here with you. Evelyn climbed onto the well's edge. Below, the water shimmered, showing, to reflections, herself and Subject 5, their features merging. She jumped. The impact never came. She floated in a void, suspended between realities. The asylum existed in fragments around her chapel here, operating theater there, her childhood farmhouse melting into the walls. Figures watched from the edges, their forms shifting between loved ones and monsters. Choose. The voices demanded. A scalpel materialized in her hand. Cut the thread. A syringe filled with black liquid. Become the bridge. A rope ladder leading upward into blinding light. Forget. Evelyn reached for the ladder. Epilogue. 3 months later. Evelyn Carter stands at her new clinic's window, watching rain drizzle over Manhattan. The board calls her a miracle worker, patients comatose for decades waking up cured. She doesn't correct them. At night, she traces the symbol scarred into her palm. The dreams come, of course. Stone walls breathing, a child's laughter in storm drains. Sometimes, her reflection winks. In the basement, a locked room hums with outdated medical equipment. The tanks glow faintly, suspended figures drifting in, amber liquid. Patient 1, patient 2, patient 3. Tonight, subject 5's tank pulses. A hand presses against the glass. Evelyn smiles, her teeth sharp, and pours herself a glass of water. It swirls black before clearing. Almost home, she whispers. Outside, thunder applauds. The final whisper fades, but the silence is a lie. You've stepped into the dark with us. Now, the choice is yours. Run or dig deeper. Subscribe now. Turn on notifications. This isn't just a channel, it's a lifeline for those brave enough to question what hides behind the rain. Miss one video, and you might miss the clue that explains the shadow in your hallway. The breath you swear isn't yours. Comment below with the timestamp that made your pulse spike. Was it the scratch on the glass? The name that matched yours? Your theories don't just haunt us, they shape what we hunt next. Share this video with one person you trust to keep secrets, or to scream them into the dark. Tag them. Let's see who's truly ready for the truth. Here's what you need to understand. Every click, every share, every silence breath as you watch it matters. The algorithm isn't random. It's a compass, and right now, it's pointing here. This isn't entertainment. It's a reckoning. You've heard the story. You've felt the chill. Now ask yourself, why did the rain sound like footsteps in the final scene? We'll wait for you in the next video, but fair warning, they don't pause. Let ambient rain swell, then cut to silence. American Pulse and Paranormal. We don't tell stories, we autopsy them.